On April 28, 1941, at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia, the initial steel sections for the USS Essex were positioned to form the foundation of what emerged as the most formidable lineup of aircraft carriers in maritime annals. Flames from welding arcs illuminated vast hull components as laborers put together the inaugural vessel among 24 in the Essex-class fleet, which would reshape the conflict in the Pacific theater. Designated hull CV-9, with a length of 872 feet and a standard displacement of 2,700 tons, its flight deck accommodated launches of 90 to 100 planes. Unbeknownst to those involved, this blueprint would ignite the most intense surge of carrier manufacturing ever seen in naval chronicles. Lessons from the Pacific Campaign convinced U.S. strategists that carriers transcended mere armaments. They embodied the pivotal elements of sea dominance. Severing an adversary's aerial supply chains left their naval forces exposed. The Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's philosophy elevated carrier-based aviation to the core of contemporary battle tactics. The U.S. forces would validate his view, albeit through unforeseen consequences. During her trials in the Atlantic, USS Essex powered through waves at 32.7 knots, driven by Westinghouse-geared turbines producing 150,000 shaft horsepower. From the bridge, Captain Donald Duncan observed the aerial maneuvers. The vessel housed 36 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 18 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. Shipyards across the nation fast-tracked Essex-class builds as President Roosevelt and the U.S. Navy grasped that these carriers would tip the scales in World War II. The Essex exemplified peak American manufacturing prowess. In contrast to Japanese designs demanding custom adjustments for each unit, the Essex series enabled large-scale output via uniform standards. Every ship weighed 2,700 tons standard and 36 on 380 tons at full load. Output statistics were staggering. Conventional Japanese carrier builds took 4 to 5 years apiece, while the Essex class managed an average of 20 months from keel placement to entry into service. Commander David McCampbell had ingrained carrier combat strategies deep into his expertise. A Princeton alumnus sharp in dogfighting and supply management, McCampbell recognized that success in carrier engagements hinged on sortie frequency and aviator endurance. The formula boiled down to planes dispatched hourly times the fleet's size, coupled with pilot replenishment surpassing battlefield attrition. Triumph or loss frequently traced back to manufacturing might and crew preparation initiatives. On the Japanese carrier Shokaku, Captain Hiroshi Matsubara assessed his squadron's readiness, 72 flyable planes. Insights from 9 prior combat missions revealed to him that U.S. output was surging beyond what Japanese facilities could counter. Efforts by the Imperial Navy to construct Unryu-class carriers, modeled on the earlier Hiryu to shorten timelines and expenses, largely faltered, with many unfinished or short on skilled flyers. Shokaku tipped the scales at 25,675 tons standard, propelled by steam turbines yielding 160,000 shaft horsepower. Her Yonmax Section 60 personnel had endured strikes from U.S. carriers, subs, and shore-based planes. Yet the vessel's core frailty mirrored a broader flaw in Japanese air operations: the failure to sustain pilot and plane replacements on par with American yields. U.S. facilities orchestrated a revolutionary assembly process. Newport News Shipbuilding handled 7 carriers. Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard secured 4 early orders. The Philadelphia Navy Yard, Norfolk Navy Yard, and New York Navy Yard integrated into the effort. Yards focused on distinct build stages while adhering to consistent blueprints. USS Yorktown, CV-10, hit the water on December 21, 1942, merely 371 days post-Pearl Harbor. USS Intrepid, CV-11, followed on April 26, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, debuted August 30, 1943. USS Franklin, CV-13, entered the launch phase October 14, 1943. The rollout proceeded with clockwork efficiency, showcasing U.S. industrial output without parallel in seafaring records. Aboard USS Bunker Hill, radar specialist First Class James Patterson manned his station in 4-hour rotations, scanning via the SK air search system. His gear picked up planes beyond 100 miles in ideal scenarios. Japanese carriers, by comparison, relied on subpar detection tech offering scant advance alerts. At 14:35 hours on June 19, 1944, Patterson's display flared with clear indicators of approaching planes. Distance, 150 miles, heading 260° relative. Numerous blips, roughly 69 in the opening assault wave. He hit the alert and grabbed for the sound-powered phone. A radar alert blared through the powered telephone in the Combat Information Center, signaling a massive enemy raid approaching from bearing 260 at a distance of 150 miles, with altitude unclear and velocity increasing. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had deployed his full array of aircraft carriers for Operation A-Go. Admiral Soemu Toyota, as Supreme Commander of the combined fleet, had directed Ozawa to execute the plan and achieve what Japan could not 2 years prior at Midway. The force included 9 carriers: Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hyo, Ryuho, Chitos, Chiyoda, and Zuikaku. These vessels carried 440 carrier-based planes, embodying Japan's final major push in naval air power. From his flagship, USS Indianapolis, Admiral Raymond Spruance, leader of the Fifth Fleet, coordinated the countermeasures. Incoming hostile planes were advancing at 300 knots, with interception possible in 30 minutes. F-6F Hellcats were already aloft on combat air patrol, vectored toward the projected encounter points. The dynamics of dogfighting boiled down to trajectories, velocities, and elevations. As Ozawa gathered 440 planes across 9 carriers, Spruance directed 95 fighters, along with torpedo and dive bombers, from 15 carriers, including 6 from the innovative Essex class. Task Force 58's initial fighter engagement unfolded at 1500 hours. Hellcats plunged into the Japanese squadrons with ruthless precision. Their 6-gun setup fired 200 rounds per minute, using armor-piercing and incendiary shells. The once dominant Japanese Zeros, rulers of Pacific airspace, now lagged in velocity, protection, and armament. Lieutenant Alexander Ww2 downed 6 enemy planes within 8 minutes. The Hellcats' edge in ceiling and dive velocity simplified the tactics. Ascend over the foe's group, swoop in firing, leverage speed to disengage, then ascend again for the next pass. Japanese flyers, often with under 100 hours of flying experience, struggled against seasoned U.S. pilots boasting 500 to 1,000 hours in battle. The next wave of Japanese attackers struck at 1530. Some 128 planes encountered a barrage of U.S. interceptors and flak. Naval aviators and shipboard guns claimed nearly 480 Japanese aircraft, including 346 carrier-based ones, on June 19th alone. The mismatch was so stark that U.S. airmen called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By dusk on June 19th, Ozawa's losses reached 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 shore-based ones. The Americans suffered just 30 planes. The imbalance proved relentless. Japan needed 18 months to train a barely adequate carrier pilot, while U.S. efforts produced proficient aviators every 6 months, outpacing Japan's entire output by 10 to 1. Yet the Essex-class carrier's display of dominance was only starting. On June 20th, Admiral Mark Mitcher launched a long-range assault on the withdrawing Japanese armada. In the late afternoon, 216 U.S. planes took off, stretching their fuel to the brink. The mission doomed the carrier Hyo, crippled Zuikaku and Chiyoda, and eliminated 65 more Japanese aircraft. The inbound U.S. group confronted nightfall in dwindling reserves. Mitcher issued the bold command that etched his legacy: light up the fleet. All vessels in Task Force 58 switched on their illuminations, guiding planes home amid risks from lurking subs. The operation underscored U.S. assurance in their edge. Though 80 planes ran dry on fuel, nearly all pilots were recovered. Japan forfeited 2 additional carriers, and almost every skilled flyer left. The Battle of the Philippine Sea transcended mere operational success. It exposed the sheer hopelessness of Japan prevailing over America's manufacturing prowess. Central to the Imperial Japanese Navy's strategy for triumph lay the notion of a climactic clash, drawing the U.S. fleet near Japanese strongholds for annihilation. Rather, surging U.S. carrier output forged an unbridgeable gap. By July 1944, 14 Essex-class carriers were active in the Pacific: USS Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Franklin, Ticonderoga, Randolph, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Bennington, Boxer, and Bonhomme Richard. Each handled 90 to 100 aircraft, and by 1945, certain squadrons surpassed that with extra night fighters. The total air complement topped 1,400 top-tier planes, backed by ample trained substitutes for each seat. Since Pearl Harbor, Japan had finished just one fresh fleet carrier. Taiho, entering service on March 7, 1944, lasted only 3 months before a submarine, USS Albacore, sent her down. The carrier, Shinano, repurposed from a Yamato-class battleship frame, joined on November 19, 1944. En route, she fell to 4 torpedoes from the U.S. submarine Archerfish just 10 days later, on November 29, 1944. She holds the record as the biggest vessel ever taken by a sub. This chasm in carrier building laid bare the pointlessness of Japan's stand, U.S. Yards churned out an Essex-class carrier every 2 months, whereas Japanese facilities demanded 4 years for even one. By October 1944, as the Imperial Japanese Navy deployed its surviving carriers as bait during the Leyte Gulf engagement, the war's result had already been sealed by overwhelming U.S. industrial output. The Leyte Gulf confrontation highlighted the total supremacy of the Essex-class vessels. On October 24, 1944, 17 U.S. carriers unleashed non-stop aerial assaults on the enemy armada. Admiral Kurita's Central Group, featuring the massive battleships Yamato and Musashi, endured unyielding bombardment from the skies. Musashi took 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs before going under, underscoring the intense striking power of Essex air wings. At the same time, Admiral Ozawa's Northern Detachment, serving as the carrier lure, included Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, carrying just 116 planes across the quartet. A significant portion of those planes were flown by novices with under 50 hours in the air. U.S. carriers sent out 527 missions against Ozawa's group on October 25, dooming all 4 Japanese carriers to the depths. Zuikaku, the final fleet carrier from the Pearl Harbor assault, sank alongside nearly her entire complement. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet now boasted 17 swift carriers centered on the Essex design. Task Force 38 sustained round-the-clock air operations, dispatching waves every 90 minutes over extended periods without faltering. Japan's carrier-based flying had dwindled to novice aviators on suicide kamikaze runs. The USS Franklin exemplified the Essex-class robustness on March 19, 1945, when 2 armor-piercing bombs exploded on her hangar deck, igniting huge blasts and blazes. She incurred 724 fatalities and 265 injuries, the heaviest losses endured by any American carrier. Nevertheless, Franklin stayed buoyant, steamed back to the U.S. on her own steam, and was poised for recommissioning had hostilities persisted. This stood in sharp relief to Japanese carrier durability. At Midway, carriers like Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu perished from wounds that Essex-class ships weathered time and again. U.S. Protocols for damage management, gear, and vessel architecture stressed endurance above all. Japanese designs, by contrast, favored aggression over protective measures. Commander John Thatch, who devised the Thatch-Weave defensive maneuver, evaluated the effects of American carrier edge. His review stressed how each Essex amplified battlefield effectiveness via greater plane numbers, advanced radar, top-tier anti-aircraft armament, and repair systems that enabled vessels to press on after taking hits fatal to other fleets' ships. The manufacturing figures painted the full picture. In World War II, the U.S. Navy commissioned 32 Essex-class aircraft carriers, with 26 started and 24 entering service. Over 2 decades, Japan managed only about a dozen genuine fleet carriers, such as Hosho, Akagi, Kaga, Ryujo, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Taiho, and the unfinished Unryu. America alone built more fleet carriers in 1943 than Japan launched in 20 years. Newport News Shipbuilding finished 7 Essex-class carriers: USS Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Franklin, Ticonderoga, and Randolph. From keel to active duty, each took less than 20 months. The yard's labor force, bolstered by thousands of female workers, juggled 3 carriers in parallel builds through 1943 and 1944. Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard delivered 6. USS Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Shangri-La, and Lake Champlain. Efficiency grew with every keel as crews honed prefabrication methods. Lake Champlain hit commissioning just 14 months post-keel, a benchmark for fleet carrier timelines. The Philadelphia Navy Yard showcased modular building perks, fabricating whole sections ahead of keel work. USS Antietam and USS Boxer wrapped up in 15 and 16 months, respectively. Methods honed for Essex-class builds shaped naval construction for generations. Specific Essex carriers notched impressive war feats that proved their preeminence. USS Lexington, dubbed the Lady Lex and the Blue Ghost after Tokyo Rose's false sink reports, joined every key Pacific offensive from Tarawa to the home islands. She downed more than 300 foe planes and kept fighting through numerous kamikaze strikes. USS Enterprise's Air Wing, despite hailing from a Yorktown-class platform, integrated smoothly with Essex carriers, highlighting U.S. naval air uniformity. Swapping planes and crews across decks boosted tactical adaptability. Japanese carriers, with their bespoke setups, missed such compatibility. Tokyo's countermeasures exposed frantic awareness of U.S. output dominance. The Shinano refit sought to transform battleship parts into a carrier. As the third Yamato-class superbattleship, Shinano had construction on the vessel had been ongoing since May 1940, but following the Battle of Midway, authorities opted to transform it into an aircraft carrier. This led to a flawed configuration that endured just 10 days until submarine-launched torpedoes doomed it to the ocean floor. Japan's Unru-class initiative sought to achieve large-scale output through streamlined blueprints. By the war's conclusion, the majority of these carriers remained incomplete or were abandoned. Although a handful of finished vessels never deployed full air wings owing to critical deficits in qualified carrier pilots, merely 3 reached completion prior to the conflict's close. Not a single one ever functioned with a complete complement of planes because of ongoing pilot scarcities. The initiative's shortcomings underscored the futility of building ships absent a skilled aviation workforce. Come January 1945, U.S. carrier strike groups roamed freely within Japanese territorial seas. Task Force 58, led by Admiral Mark Mitcher, possessed the capability to unleash strikes involving 1,000 planes directly on Tokyo. Japan, meanwhile, lacked any active carriers and had fewer than 100 proficient pilots for carrier duty. The inevitability of U.S. triumph was undeniable. The disparity in human casualties was starkly illustrative as well. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, America sacrificed 123 aircraft and 109 lives, yet obliterated almost 600 adversary planes, dispatched 2 fleet carriers, 1 light carrier, and 2 oilers to the depths, and claimed nearly 3,000 Japanese pilots and crewmen. Every Essex-class carrier demanded about 3,000 personnel to operate. U.S. training efforts were generating 5,000 carrier-ready sailors each month. Japan's programs had ground to a halt by late 1944. Technological disparities proved equally pivotal. U.S. carriers employed SK and SK-2 radar for directing fighters at distances over 150 miles. The identification, friend or foe, IFF mechanism avoided mishaps from friendly fire amid vast aerial clashes. Japanese carriers depended on spotters using eyesight and rudimentary radar limited to under 50 miles. Procedures on the flight deck highlighted America's methodical edge. Essex-class ships could dispatch an 80-plane strike in less than 45 minutes. Retrieval processes, aided by landing signal officer, LSO instructions, and enhanced arresting wires, enabled swift turnaround for landings. Japanese equivalents took almost 2 hours for comparable tasks, with elevated risks of mishaps. The Combat Information Center, CIC, on each Essex-class carrier marked a breakthrough in sea combat. It featured instantaneous tracking of numerous aircraft, surface vessels, and submersible dangers. It handled radio links to all U.S. planes. It facilitated synchronization across various carrier formations. Japanese carriers made do with speaking tubes and hand-drawn charts. Designs for aviation fuel systems exposed contrasting philosophies. U.S. Carriers incorporated enclosed setups with CO2 flushing to avert fuel vapor blasts. Fuel storage areas were buffered by empty voids and water-filled sections. Japanese carriers, even the innovative Taiho, endured devastating failures from individual torpedo strikes when fuel fumes ignited. The kamikaze offensive, launched in October 1944, signaled Japan's acknowledgement of orthodox failure. These suicidal one-way missions offered the sole path to pierce the shield of enemy fighters and flak to target American carriers. Nevertheless, such frantic tactics yielded modest results against Essex-class carriers, bolstered by armored decks and refined damage mitigation. USS Intrepid endured 5 kamikaze impacts, yet resumed duties repeatedly. USS Ticonderoga absorbed 2 such blows, losing 144 crew but stayed battle-ready. USS Essex weathered a kamikaze assault on November 25, 1944, that claimed 15 lives but caused only slight structural harm. The vessel's durability confounded Japanese tacticians, who anticipated that lone strikes would neutralize carriers. USS Bunker Hill offered further proof of Essex-class endurance. On May 11, 1945, 2 kamikazes collided within 30 seconds, sparking enormous blazes and 389 fatalities. Though the harm would have submerged any Japanese counterpart, Bunker Hill proceeded to Bremerton independently for fixes. Her endurance reflected advanced training and gear for controlling damage. By March 1945, as Bonhomme Richard entered service as the 14th Essex-class carrier in action, U.S. air strength in the Pacific surpassed 100 decks, encompassing light and escort types. Japan operated 0 carriers and possessed under 5,000 planes of every variety in its home territories. The imbalance was total. Admiral Chester Nimitz evaluated the broader ramifications in his dispatch to Admiral Ernest King. The Essex-class carrier effort delivered more than mere vessels. It conferred a comprehensive dominance that the foe could not rival. Every carrier embodied U.S. manufacturing prowess, superior instruction, and tech progress that outstripped Japanese efforts exponentially. Output rates held steady even as success loomed certain. USS Shangri-La entered service on September 15, 1944. USS Lake Champlain's commissioning launched on June 3, 1945. The USS Tarawa entered service on December 8, 1945. The initiative gained further traction as U.S. strategists shifted focus from World War II toward possible upcoming wars. Ships of the Essex class proved essential in the Pacific campaign of World War II, spanning from 1943 until the conflict's conclusion. Starting with assaults in the Central Pacific and the assault on Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands, all significant amphibious assaults from Tarawa to Okinawa relied on Essex-class carriers to deliver aerial backing. The assault on Marianas highlighted the carrier's intense pace of action. 15 carriers executed 470 fighter passes, 220 bombing runs, and sustained non-stop combat air patrols over 19 straight days. Despite losses in battle and wear from mechanics, aircraft readiness remained above 80%. Japanese shore-based air power was rendered ineffective as a fighting entity. In the Philippines campaign of October 1944, 17 swift carriers functioned across 4 task forces. On October 24th alone, amid the Battle of Leyte Gulf, U.S. carriers dispatched more than 1,400 sorties. The following day, planes from carriers overwhelmed and sank the super battleship Musashi through relentless aerial barrages that no vessel could endure. The feats of Commander David McCamsell with Air Group 15 on the USS Essex illustrated U.S. dominance in the skies. On June 19, 1944, in the Marianas Turkey Shoot, McCamsell downed 5 Japanese dive bombers, earning ace status in one day. That same afternoon, on another sortie, he claimed 2 additional zeros above Guam. During the early stages of the Battle of Leyte Gulf on October 24, 1944, he stood as the sole U.S. pilot to reach ace in a day twice, destroying 9 enemy aircraft in just one flight. Air Group 15 earned the nickname Fabled 15. Over 6 months of intense fighting, they eliminated more Japanese aircraft, 315 in the air and 348 on the ground, while sinking greater amounts of enemy tonnage than any other Pacific air unit. The group received credit for destroying 296,500 tons of faux shipping, encompassing 1 battleship, 3 carriers, 9 cruisers, and 19 destroyers. Differences in pilot preparation underscored yet another area of U.S. edge. Air groups for Essex-class carriers demanded about 350 pilots and crew members. U.S. programs churned out 2,000 skilled naval aviators each month. By 1944, Japan's efforts had dwindled to under 100 semi-trained pilots per month. Patterns of operational casualties highlighted the gaps in expertise. U.S. carrier air groups typically saw just 2% monthly losses from mishaps. Japanese squads, hampered by novice pilots, endured 10% monthly rates from operations alone. By 1945, combat kill ratios surpassed 10.1 to America's benefit. The turkey shoot represented the standard rather than an outlier. Stats on aircraft manufacturing further bolstered carrier dominance. Grumman supplied 12,275 F-6F Hellcats from 1943 to 1945. Curtiss Wright built 740 SB-2C Helldivers. General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division assembled 9,139 TBM Avengers. By 1944, U.S. monthly output outpaced Japan's yearly totals. The supply chain backing Essex-class missions was just as remarkable. Tankers for fuel, ammo transporters, and provision ships kept carriers afloat for extended periods. Methods for refueling and resupplying while underway, honed in wartime, enabled non-stop missions. In contrast, Japanese carriers needed dock stops for essentials, curbing their maneuverability. The Iwo Jima offensive in February 1945 displayed the endurance of Essex-class vessels. Before the landings, carriers delivered strikes non-stop for 72 hours, then offered steady close air support for 36 days. Planes from the USS Essex by themselves completed Panina 18 combat missions, unleashing 156 tons of explosives and launching 141 rockets. No Japanese carrier contingent could match that level of sustained effort. Come April 1945, with actions underway at Okinawa, the imbalance had grown insurmountable. Task Force 58 deployed 18 fast carriers featuring 14 Essex-class units. This encompassed Essex-class fleet carriers alongside Independence-class light carriers, with air groups boasting over 400 planes, plus full spares of aircraft and aviators. Japan mustered roughly 1,300 planes of various kinds for kamikaze strikes, many flown by trainees with less than 30 hours aloft. The Okinawa effort spanned 82 days, during which Essex-class carriers upheld relentless activity amid 1,900 kamikaze attempts. USS Bunker Hill, USS Enterprise, and USS Randolph all withstood kamikaze strikes and pressed on with duties. Japan depleted its leftover air resources, yielding scant tactical gains against the fortified U.S. carriers. The closing carrier assaults on Japan in July and August 1945 affirmed utter control. Carriers targeted runways, train depots, and ports with little pushback. On July 10, 1945, Task Force 38 sent out 1,022 sorties over Tokyo, outnumbering Japan's entire air inventory. Across the full expanse of Japan's home territories, their anti-aircraft systems proved powerless against the swift advanced U.S. planes. The deployment of atomic weapons brought the conflict to a close prior to Operation Olympic, the planned assault on Japanese soil, which would have showcased an even more intense buildup of U.S. carrier forces. Operations with the British Pacific Fleet beside Essex-class vessels highlighted U.S. edges even within the alliance. UK carriers, equipped with reinforced flight decks yet carrying fewer planes, found it challenging to keep pace with the American rhythm of missions. For instance, HMS Formidable handled just 36 aircraft, while an Essex managed around 100. The British expressed clear respect for U.S. methods in handling battle damage and incorporated numerous such practices into their later post-war designs. After the war, evaluations laid bare the complete extent of Essex-class supremacy. Not one fell to foe-inflicted harm, though a few endured severe blows from airstrikes. Even amid kamikaze assaults, standard bombings, and torpedo strikes, 0 Essex-class carriers succumbed to enemy efforts. In stark contrast, Japanese carriers faced almost total annihilation rates. This gap in endurance stemmed not from chance, but from deliberate engineering choices and outstanding damage management. Admiral Raymond Spruance's evaluation summed up the triumph perfectly. The Essex-class carrier initiative armed the U.S. Navy with the pivotal armament of the Pacific Campaign. This came not solely from standalone excellence, though that was real, but from organized manufacturing that crushed Japanese resources. In 1943 alone, we launched more carriers than Japan had brought into service over 2 decades. That fact sealed the conflict's result. The influence stretched far past World War II. Essex-class ships continued duty in Korea, Vietnam, and lingered into the 1990s as instructional platforms. USS Lexington, the final active Essex-class carrier, stayed in commission until 1991, logging 48 years of service. Their blueprint shaped all following U.S. carriers. The building methods honed for them transformed global ship construction. The ultimate tally was telling: 24 Essex-class carriers entered service. 14 engaged in World War II battles. Wings from these ships took down more than 5,000 Japanese planes and sent 200,000 tons of enemy warships to the bottom. Japanese carrier forces, which kicked off the war with crushing triumphs at Pearl Harbor, got wiped out by America's manufacturing might. Captain Arleigh Burke, destined to lead naval operations later, watched Essex-class carriers in action with Task Force 58. His verdict was blunt and on point. The Japanese opened this fight with the finest carrier aviators globally. We closed it as the sole ones left. The Essex class enabled that via massive output and better engineering. We didn't merely outmatch them, we buried them under sheer volume. Data on industrial ramp-up exposed the breadth of U.S. success. At Newport News, the shipyard staff swelled from 11,000 to 31,000 between 1941 and 1943. Non-stop shifts kept work flowing 24 hours a day. By 1944, women made up 20% of the labor force. Building each Essex-class carrier demanded 55,000 tons of steel, 1,000 meters of wiring, and 250,000 labor hours. While Japan labored over even one carrier at a time, U.S. facilities juggled several hulls in parallel builds. From 1932 to 1941, Japan's legislature approved 4 merchant shipping acts offering bonuses to firms ordering ships with war-ready features. Yet repurposing cargo ships couldn't rival the output of dedicated carrier yards. Innovations in Essex-class builds surpassed raw quantities, shifting to welding from riveting cut build times by 30%. Sectional prefabrication enabled simultaneous work on key parts. Enhanced air circulation curbed risks from fuel vapors. Bulletproof flight decks withstood explosive hits. Deck edge lifts kept ops running amid plane handling. Radar-guided intercepts revolutionized carrier protection. Coordination between onboard controllers and airborne pilots delivered the edge that doomed incoming threats. One Essex-class carrier's command center could orchestrate safeguards for a whole fleet unit. Japanese carriers lacked such integrated tools, depending on solo pilot judgment over coordinated oversight. Crew skills amplified U.S. strengths. Every sailor underwent required damage mitigation drills. Onboard fire academies imparted skills that preserved many ships from destruction. Each carrier boasted surgical suites and sick bays for 60 patients. Japanese counterparts offered scant medical support and basic damage response prep. The Essex Initiative's financial ripple reached deep into U.S. life. Yard employees pocketed record paychecks that boosted everyday buying. Local enterprises near the docks boomed. The effort proved how citizen-led industrial drive could hit unmatched output levels. Surpassing the rigid control of authoritarian planned economies, American industry delivered a decisive edge. By the time Japan capitulated in August 1945, the Essex-class carriers had accomplished a feat without parallel in maritime annals. One unified fleet type had shaped the result of the grandest sea conflict in history, not merely via standout performance, but via unmatched efficiency in manufacturing, crew preparation, and deployment that rivals simply couldn't rival. At the conflict's close, Vice Admiral John McCain, leading Task Force 38, offered the ultimate evaluation. The Essex-class carrier transcended being a mere vessel. It embodied a comprehensive arsenal encompassing the hull, its aviation wing, logistics networks, educational pipelines, and the manufacturing infrastructure that outpaced adversaries' ability to destroy them. Such an approach wasn't about even odds, it was about securing triumph. The figures painted the full picture. Starting from April 1941, when the Essex was first constructed, through to Japan's surrender in August 1945, U.S. facilities assembled the mightiest carrier-based air arm ever assembled. 24 vessels sharing one blueprint, more than 2,000 planes ready for action at all times, 30,000 skilled aviators and support staff. Success born of dominant manufacturing prowess. Beneath the Pacific's surface, the remnants of Japan's flat tops lay scattered on the seabed. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu from Midway, Shoho from the Coral Sea, Shokaku and Taiho from the Philippine Sea, Zuikaku, Chiyoda, Chitose, and Zuiho from Leyte Gulf. Their sailors, revered across enemy lines for bravery in the face of insurmountable challenges, paid the ultimate price. Yet their losses signaled the close of a time when tactical prowess and veteran know-how could offset production shortfalls. In his concluding dispatch to the Secretary of the Navy, Admiral Chester Nimitz declared, "The Essex-class carrier initiative stands as the pinnacle of concentrated maritime aviation strength ever realized. These vessels and their operators have shown that U.S. manufacturing dominance, paired with exceptional instruction and innovation, forges a fighting edge beyond any foe's reach." The Essex class didn't merely claim the Pacific campaign, they rendered Japanese success unattainable. Naval combat had undergone a total transformation. Warships that once ruled strategic doctrine for generations were reduced to roles in coastal barrages and skyward protection. The carrier, refined through the Essex-class blueprint, emerged as the cornerstone of contemporary fleets. These Essex-class ships illustrated that in contemporary conflict, output volume amplified by cutting-edge progress yields conquest. They revealed how free societies, once fully engaged, could wield productive might, surpassing that of dictatorial states. Across the immense Pacific expanse, with engagements spanning vast distances and resolved by planes launching from floating platforms, the Essex class confirmed that high-volume output infused with excellence delivers total dominance.